Welcome to the era of fast fashion, where trends vanish faster than your paycheck. And nobody churns out trendy clothes like Shein. This Chinese company exploded onto the scene. They've got everything. Crop tops, ripped jeans, such as those weird mesh shirts nobody asked for. You name it, they've shipped it out at lightning speed. But here's the thing about fast fashion. It's cheap, disposable, and often made in less than ideal conditions. But who cares about ethics when you can get a new wardrobe for the price of a coffee, right? Wrong. We'll dive into that later. Shein's rise to the top was meteoric. They went from a small online retailer to a global fashion giant. How did they do it? Buckle up, we're diving into the wild world of Shein. Forget fancy storefronts and celebrity endorsements. Shein cracked the code by harnessing the power of the internet. Their secret weapon, an algorithm so sophisticated it makes Google look like a flip phone. This digital mastermind tracks your every click, like, and purchase, creating a detailed profile of your fashion desire. Think about it. Every time you scroll through their endless feed of clothes, you're feeding the beast. The algorithm learns your style, predicts your next purchase, and bombards you with targeted ads. It's like having a personal stylist who's also a mind-reading robot. But it wasn't just about understanding their customers. Shein also mastered the art of speed and efficiency. They built a supply chain that could churn out new designs faster than you can say, trend alert. While traditional fashion houses were stuck in their old ways, Shein was moving at the speed of light. Armed with their algorithmic advantage and lightning-fast production, Shein set their sights on world domination. They expanded into new markets with the precision of a military campaign, conquering countries one cheap dress at a time. From the United States to Europe to Southeast Asia, Shein's reach became unavoidable. They were the ultimate disruptors, shaking up the fashion industry and leaving established brands scrambling to keep up. Traditional retailers were caught flat-footed, their outdated business models unable to compete with Shein's online juggernaut. It seemed like Shein was unstoppable. Their empire built on a foundation of algorithms, cheap labor, and an insatiable appetite for the latest trends. But as we all know, even the mightiest empires can crumble. And in Shein's case, the cracks were starting to show. For Shein's meteoric rise wasn't just about algorithms and cheap clothes. It was about speed. Relentless, breakneck speed. While traditional fashion houses lumbered along with their seasonal collections, Shein was pumping out new designs faster than a teenager scrolling through TikTok. We're talking thousands of new items every single day. Think about that for a second. By the time you finish your morning coffee, Shein has already dropped enough new clothes to fill a small boutique. It's a dizzying pace, designed to keep you constantly clicking, buying, and craving more. But how do they do it? Well, imagine a vast network of factories, all churning out clothes at lightning speed. These aren't your typical sweatshops, though. Shein calls them partner factories. But let's be real, they have these manufacturers on a tight leash. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the price. And how can Shein offer clothes so cheap that you practically feel guilty not buying them? Well, let's just say someone's paying the price, and it ain't the algorithm. Think about it. Those trendy crop tops and ripped jeans aren't magically appearing on your doorstep. Behind the sleek website and influencer marketing campaigns lies a complex and often opaque supply chain. Remember those partner factories we talked about it as? They're often located in countries with lax labor laws and minimal environmental regulations. This allows Shein to keep costs low, but at what cost? Workers in these factories often face grueling hours, low wages, and unsafe working conditions. And let's not forget about the environmental impact of churning out mountains of cheap clothing. Fast fashion, by its very nature, is incredibly wasteful. With its low prices and endless supply of trendy clothes, Shein quickly became the go-to destination for budget-conscious shoppers, especially Gen Z. Traditional retailers, with their bloated inventories and slow-to-adapt business models, were left in the dust. They simply couldn't compete with Shein's speed, agility, and ruthless efficiency. But here's the thing about monopolies. They're great for the company in control, but not so much for everyone else. As Shein grew, so did its influence over the fashion industry. They became the tastemakers, dictating trends and driving down prices to unsustainable levels. Small businesses, independent designers, they all felt the squeeze as Shein's dominance grew. It was like a game of Monopoly, and Shein was quickly buying up all the properties. And just like in the game, when one player has all the power, it's only a matter of time before the whole thing comes crashing down. All right, folks, time for a quick detour into the wild world of international trade. Don't worry, it's more exciting than it sounds. See, Shein found a way to game the system, exploiting a little loophole in US customs law known as the de minimis rule. Sounds boring, right? Well, this loophole is how Shein flooded the US market with cheap clothes and crushed American businesses. Here's the deal. Normally, when you import goods into the US, you have to pay import duties, right? Or makes sense. But the de minimis rule says that shipments under $800 can enter the country duty-free. It was designed for small businesses. You know, mom-and-pop shops importing artisanal cheese or whatever that. But Shein, they saw an opportunity. They broke down their shipments into tiny packages, each one valued under the $800 threshold. They're genius, right? Except it meant they were dodging millions, maybe billions, in import duties. Talk about unfair competition. Meanwhile, back on Main Street, American retailers were getting crushed. They couldn't compete with Shein's artificially low prices. It was like bringing a knife to a gunfight, except the knife was made of flimsy plastic and broke after one use. Think about those once bustling malls now filled with vacant storefronts. Remember the local boutiques run by families for generations. They were getting steamrolled by Shein's online onslaught. And let's not forget about American jobs, folks. Manufacturing jobs were already disappearing overseas, and now retail jobs were following suit. But hey, at least those TikTok influencers were getting rich promoting Shein hauls, right? So there's that. Except here's another twist. A lot of those influencers were getting paid in, wait for it, free clothes. Not even cash, folks. Just piles of polyester blend garments. The irony is almost too much to bear. Now, you'd think someone would have put a stop to this, right? Well, the US government finally started to catch on. Lawmakers were like, wait a minute, this Chinese company is playing us for fools. And the American public, they were starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, those $5 t-shirts were too good to be true. The tide was turning. Congress started talking about closing the de minimis loophole, and there was even talk of banning Shein altogether. And you know what? Some people were actually cheering. They were tired of getting played by fast fashion giants. They wanted ethical fashion, sustainable practices, and maybe even, dare I say it, clothes that lasted longer than a single wash cycle. But hold on, folks, because this story is far from over. Remember that trade war I mentioned earlier? The one between the US and China? Well, it's about to get real. And for Shein, the stakes couldn't be higher. Let's be real, folks. You knew there had to be a catch. When you're chasing the cheapest prices, something's got to give. And in Shein's case, it was the quality. Those bargain prices came with a hidden cost. Fast fashion thrives on impulse buys. That dopamine rush, that's the real product. Shein banks on the thrill of the deal. Quality control wasn't their priority. Seams unraveling after one wear. Zippers that zipped right off. Clothes shrinking in the wash. Reviews were a tapestry of fashion disasters. But wait, there's more. Shein found itself in another sticky situation. Lax environmental regulations led to toxic chemicals in clothing. Cutting corners on production affects quality and safety. Independent investigations found lead, phthalates, and formaldehyde. These chemicals pose serious health risks, from skin irritations to hormone disruption, even cancer. Shein isn't the only fast fashion culprit. The industry often uses toxic chemicals in production. Shein's volume and speed magnify the problem. So you've got questionable quality, potential health hazards, and a growing chorus of unhappy customers. Not exactly a recipe for success, right? But Shein's biggest problem wasn't the clothes themselves. It was the foundation their entire empire was built on. A foundation that was about to crumble under the weight of its own contradictions. See, Shein's dominance relied on this delicate balance: dirt-cheap prices, lightning-fast production, and a steady stream of new customers hooked on the latest trends. But as soon as one of those pillars started to wobble, the whole structure was at risk of collapse. And wobble it did. The quality issues were getting harder to ignore. The negative press about labor practices and environmental concerns was starting to stick. And those once loyal customers, they were starting to wise up, realizing that maybe, just maybe, there was more to fashion than endless cycles of cheap disposable clothes. Remember that ominous trade war brewing in the background? Well, it decided to crash Shein's party like an uninvited guest with a bone to pick. The US and China, those two economic titans, were locked in a battle of tariffs, sanctions, and geopolitical maneuvering. Think of it as a high-stakes game of chess played with billions of dollars and the fate of global trade hanging in the balance. And where did Shein, that darling of fast fashion, find itself? Right in the crosshairs. See those mountains of cheap clothes being shipped from China. They suddenly became a lot less cheap when the US government slapped tariffs on Chinese imports. Ouch! Shein's entire business model was built on razor-thin margins and those sweet, sweet tariff loopholes. But tariffs don't discriminate. They don't care if you're a multi-billion-dollar company or a grandma selling hand-knitted scarves on Etsy. Everyone pays the price. Well, almost everyone. More on that later. The trade war wasn't just about tariffs, though. It exposed a deeper shift happening beneath the surface of global trade. A decoupling of the world's two largest economies, and the US, once a champion of free trade, was starting to rethink its relationship with China. Concerns about intellectual property theft, unfair trade practices, and national security risks were bubbling to the surface. And then there was the whole human rights issue. Remember those partner factories churning out Shein's trendy clothes? The ones with questionable labor practices and reports of forced labor? Yeah, that wasn't a good look for a company trying to navigate the increasingly choppy waters of US-China relations. The writing was on the wall. The era of cheap Chinese goods flooding the US market was coming to an end. And for companies like Shein, heavily reliant on Chinese manufacturing and a steady flow of American consumers, this decoupling posed an existential threat. Remember that all-powerful algorithm? The one that could predict your fashion desires before you even knew them? Well, it turns out even the smartest algorithms have their blind spots. See, algorithms are great at analyzing data, but they're not so good at predicting black swan events, those unexpected occurrences that throw everything into chaos. The trade war, the pandemic, the global supply chain meltdown? Those weren't just data points for Shein's algorithm to crunch. They were seismic shifts that exposed the fragility of their entire business model. Suddenly, those just-in-time inventory systems and lightning-fast shipping times weren't so reliable anymore. The algorithm, once a symbol of Shein's dominance, became a liability, unable to adapt to the rapidly changing landscape. It's like trying to navigate a hurricane with a map of a sunny day. The rules of the game had changed, and Shein, for all its algorithmic prowess, was caught flat-footed. Remember that meteoric rise we talked about? That gravity-defying ascent to the top of the fashion world? Well, what goes up must come down. And in Shein's case, the fall from grace was as swift and brutal as its initial rise. The trade war, the pandemic, the growing awareness of fast fashion's dark side, it all caught up with Shein like a bad outfit repeating itself. Remember those record-breaking profits? The billions of dollars in valuation, or they started to evaporate faster than a cheap polyester blend in a hot dryer. Investors, once eager to get a piece of the Shein pie, started to get cold feet. Those whispers of an IPO, of becoming the next Alibaba. They turned into awkward coughs, then uncomfortable silences. The once mighty Shein, the disruptor, the innovator, was suddenly yesterday's news. A cautionary tale whispered in the corridors of Silicon Valley and Wall Street. So what becomes of Shein? Does it fade into obscurity, a footnote in the ever-evolving saga of fast fashion? Or does it manage to reinvent itself, to adapt and survive in this new, more conscious consumer landscape? The jury's still out, folk. But one thing's for sure, the fast fashion industry as a whole is facing a reckoning. Consumers, especially the younger generation, are becoming more aware of the true cost of those cheap clothes they're buying. They're asking questions about labor practices, environmental impact, and the ethics of churning out mountains of clothes destined for landfills. The future of fashion, it seems, might not be about speed and disposability. It might be about quality, sustainability, and a return to the idea that clothes should be cherished, not chucked after a single wear. Imagine that a world where fashion isn't just about the next trend, but about making choices that are good for people and the planet. Radical, right? So what did we learn from this wild ride through the rise and stumble of Shein? Well, for starters, maybe, just maybe, when something seems too good to be true, it probably is. Those $5 t-shirts, those trendy dresses that magically appear on your doorstep for the price of a latte. They come with a hidden cost. Someone, somewhere, is paying the price for our addiction to cheap fashion. But it's not just about consumer guilt, folks. It's about understanding the systems at play, the way globalization, technology, and consumerism have collided to create this perfect storm of fast fashion. It's about recognizing that our choices as consumers have real-world consequences. Shein's story isn't just about one company's rise and fall. It's a microcosm of the challenges and opportunities facing the fashion industry as a whole. It's a reminder that we, as consumers, have the power to demand better. Better quality, better ethics, and a better future for fashion.